once again. This is the 5th year that we're holding this conference in Las Vegas, and it is the 10th overall CoinAgenda. So everybody, hearkening back to October of 2014 for the first CoinAgenda. Anybody here at the first CoinAgenda? There we go. A couple of folks, yeah, okay. And a few folks that are coming in later, like Matt Rozak was a speaker at the first one before he did Block when he was with, I think it was called Silk Road Capital at the time, and then he realized that that was not something that really played well in the crypto community, changed it to Tally Capital, and is now on the Forbes Billionaire list. We actually have a couple of people on the Forbes Billionaire list speaking here. So, I remember actually before the first CoinAgenda, going back and forth on Skype with Matt, and we were sort of having a bet whether the price of Bitcoin, which had been, of course, did its parabolic run-up in 2013. It started the year at 11 and ended the year, you know, it actually broke 1100 on Mt. Gox, maybe a little asterisk for Mt. Gox. It was really the only exchange at the start of the year. Bitstamp was just starting out. And, you know, then we had this kind of slow slide after that for about the next 2 years. And Bitcoin was, you know, very steady around 600, just like it's around 6,000 right now, or 6,300, 6,400. And it had kept sliding in October, which normally in up years, it typically goes up in the fourth quarter. Last year, of course, it went parabolic. And Matt and I were going back and forth, and he said, if it goes under 300, I'm selling the family silverware and backing up a truck. So it went under 300 the day before CoinAgenda, and I said, do you have the truck rented? Hopefully he did sell the silverware. I think so. He's on the Forbes Billionaire list now in the space. So at any rate, we are in interesting times. That goes without saying in this space, but we're now in a time that, you know, seems vaguely familiar. History, as they say, doesn't repeat, but it tends to rhyme. And we are now in the year after a parabolic run-up, so you can sort of look at what happened in 2014 and see a lot of similarities. A difference, of course, is that we have a lot more exchanges. We're not just relying on Mt. Gox. We have a lot more institutions in the space, looking at the space, being in the space. We're now looking at security tokens. We still now are trying to get clarity. Before then, it was just, what's the IRS going to say about taxes? Now it's, what's the SEC going to say about defining the Howey test and security status versus utility or consumption status? And that's a debate that's going to probably be resolved over the next, you know, 6 to 12 months, and it'll be exciting times. For 2019, we'll have 5 events. 4 of them will be in this format. We will have our second Asia show in Hong Kong. We're looking at July for that. We'll have our 3rd annual CoinAgenda in Caribbean. That'll be the next 3-day conference. Last year we had over 600 people, and it was part of Puerto Rico Blockchain Week. We're looking to do that again. Brock Pierce will be here later. Has his restart week that'll be part of that, and also Blockchain Unbound said that we'll coordinate and basically have it sort of, you can go down to Puerto Rico and sort of learn about the island, see if you want to move there. We're going to hear about that from our lunch speaker today, and the reasons why entrepreneurs really should look at it in this space, entrepreneurs in general, and then we're going to have our European show. We typically do it in June or July. We're looking at maybe moving into September next year. We don't have a firm date. We're probably going to do it in Monaco. We did the first one in Barcelona. We did the second one in Malta, and we're trying to move it around to places that are interesting that people want to go to. Has to be like someplace nice and warm and a decent month to go there, but also that have interesting things to do with crypto. And we're still open to jurisdictions. We try not to repeat on those, whereas we repeat completely in Vegas and in Puerto Rico, probably because I live in those 2 places. And we have an exciting day today, and I'm pleased to have Jen Greyson as our MC for the day. We started this tradition, I think it was last year, where we had a different moderator, MC rather, for each day. And I know Jen from her work at Nuriel, which is a AI blockchain, did a small kind of early private round, and they're still developing some things, and she's doing some new things as well, and also doing a lot of great speaking and thought leadership in the space, and also some like cowboy fiction. So you'll have to start, talking with Caitlin when she's here, talking about Wyoming, and. So I think without further ado, I will turn the mic over to Jen, and we're going to get started with our first couple of panels.
Welcome, everybody. This is kind of full circle for me. I'd been in the blockchain space for 5 weeks, but when I went to my first conference, and it was Michael's CoinAgenda in Barcelona, and so I spent 3 days drinking out of a fire hose from the originals, and that was it for me. I drank the Kool-Aid full force. So excited to be here and to get to Emcee. I'll go ahead and get us started by introducing our first panel, which is the search for the world's friendliest jurisdiction. So if you panelists want to go ahead and come up, and moderator, and we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. We are going to have another panelist joining us, but we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, let's give a round of applause to Michael Terpin and his team for putting this together. So welcome. Michael asked who was at the first CoinAgenda. I was just a newbie in Bitcoin and attended the first CoinAgenda. And they've been fantastic ever since, as Michael's expanded them around the globe. So I'm going to introduce myself, ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll talk about jurisdictions. So my name is Susan Poole, and I currently do a bunch of stuff in this space, but a couple of the things I do is I work with the European Union blockchain forums, which are held about 5 times a year, and also I do just independent advisory consulting work in this space.
Hi, I'm Rex Wong, CEO of AIVON. We're doing a AI Video Open Network is what AIVON stands for. It's basically, we're building AI for video using the blockchain to crowdsource the computing resources and human expertise to train the AI to scan videos and build a big open source video search engine.
This works, right? Great. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Olga Feldmeier. I'm based in Switzerland. Some media adopt me as Bitcoin Queen of Switzerland, so I'm going to talk a lot about Europe. I'm a banker, but today I'm CEO of Smart Valor, and Smart Valor is a decentralized marketplace for tokenized alternative investments.
Stephen Meade, sorry I was in the hall. A lot of you know me. We've got MonetaPro, which is a closed-loop platform for global corporate barter, private blockchain. We did a separate token. And some of the stuff I'll end up talking about around Malta is we looked globally around the world for not only jurisdiction, but 4 or 5 other components that make that particular jurisdiction really interesting. And I'm sure I'll cover that as we go.
Excellent, thank you. So the title of this panel is Search for the World's Friendliest Jurisdiction. Interesting that we're having this panel in the United States. Kind of interesting, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But before we talk about that, I would like to ask the panelists, what constitutes a friendly jurisdiction for crypto? And I'm going to start with Olga, who's in Crypto Valley in Switzerland. And if you don't know, that's quite a crypto-intense area. Olga?
Yeah. Well, we had to discover this for ourselves. Back in 2014, around 2015, I was part of a Bitcoin company named Xapo, and Xapo was a Bitcoin wallet and custody provider. And we were actually based in Silicon Valley, but back then, being a Bitcoin company in US wasn't a great thing, right? So we were looking for the best jurisdiction, right? So we looked at Hong Kong and Singapore and Luxembourg and travel to all those places. And the result was that we decided to go for Switzerland because of the, well, several reasons. Because, you know, basically the regulator was quite open to innovation in financial services space, but also because Switzerland is today's fifth largest banking center with 200-year-old history and reputation. So it was kind of like, if you're in financial services, if your product or service is somehow related to banking, you not only want the great the jurisdiction that is friendly to your business, but also the branding, right, the standing. I mean, you could go to Bermuda or Malta, but it's different, right? So we went for Switzerland, and we were successful receiving the first Bitcoin license or exception from license in Switzerland.
Excellent. Thank you, Olga. And Rex, what are your views on jurisdiction and what constitutes a friendly jurisdiction, for example, your type of business or any other business in this space?
Yeah, so we're actually based in Singapore, and actually we weren't in Singapore specifically for blockchain. We were actually, my co-founder is actually Singaporean, and we were concentrating on Asia business, and we were founded around 2016, but all of a sudden blockchain started popping up, and it was because Singapore is probably one of the more friendly jurisdictions, and also a fintech or a financial hub, just like Switzerland is. And so blockchain just popped up, and as some of the other Asian governments like China and Korea started clamping down, there was a lot of, I call them blockchain refugees, that actually ended up in Singapore. So that's why you see a lot of the major Chinese exchanges and a lot of the funds, they've based in Singapore. And I think the main reason they looked at it was that Singapore is still a financial hub. I'm sure that's why Switzerland is also picking that up. And so where it has a degree of credibility is that it's a major financial hub, and the government's very friendly. So you see a lot of exchanges that have set up, and a lot of projects that have set up. And I would tell you probably 90% of them are not from Singapore. We happen to be very unique that we actually are from Singapore. Yeah, they've started popping up, and so now you see a lot of Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese running around Singapore with their various companies.
Thank you. Stephen, so you mentioned Malta. Are you an expert in the Malta jurisdictional scene? Or you have some insights, I'm guessing?
I'll go with insights as opposed to expert. But for us, I was looking at the totality of things. It wasn't just jurisdiction. We were looking at Singapore, Zouk. Malta has something what I call the 5 pillars, which were important. One was the actual legal jurisdiction of what they did. They had precedents before in the actual internet gambling and gaming space. That was more interesting to me than the banking. The Zurich Zeus guys scare me, because if the banking regulators are going to try and put this in a framework of banking, it's already happening in Switzerland. What they're coming out with the regulations are much more restrictive than what a lot of people thought they were going to be when they moved. Nothing against it, but so Malta already had a precedence of doing these really unique things, and they learned from their mistakes. They made some mistakes in the gambling and things like that. So that first pillar of jurisdiction was important to us. Then we looked at corporate tax, because last time I checked, the goal of a company is to eventually make money. You wouldn't believe that in the ICO world. You think it's running around raising money and going to conferences. But at some point, if you make money, taxes became a big contributor. Singapore is great at 0. Zurich, not so much. Malta's 35% with a 30% rebate, gets you down to a 5% net tax base. So that was important to us. The third one is banking. The banking laws, what fascinated me with the banking laws is what Malta did is they passed the digital ledger and the digital asset laws first to standardize terminology. And that's important. I can ask half of you guys in the room what a security token is, and half of you think it's an investment instrument, and half of you think it's tied to a dividend or an asset. And so our community's already screwed up on terminology. Malta said, hey, let's set the terminology and then force the bankers to follow. So now you've got a thread of consistency in terminology. So the banks are getting ready to launch in November for crypto deposits. And they're going to charge a quarter to a half basis point for management fee, offer banking services. So where we move our deposits was very important, because I'm running around with you know, I've got my stuff on thumb drives in houses that I don't own, so nobody can steal it. And that's just, without a custodial account, it's an impossibility to build a company as a business. It's a fallacy and a joke for us right now. Then I got technology, and I'm almost done. Technology and service providers. Again, when we looked at Singapore, Malta's an English-speaking country. So dealing with programmers, technology, talent, all of my attorneys, all of our contracts, all of our bankers are all in English, which was a component. And we believe we can hire talent off of Malta, which we couldn't do with the talent base in Bermuda and the Caymans and some of these other areas. And then the fifth one's personal tax. And you know, I love Terpin and the guys running down to Puerto Rico and all that, but counting the number of days on an island, I've got enough to think about without having to count a number of days. And Malta's got some interesting things from a personal tax standpoint. And so I was looking at totality and a long term, not just short-term jurisdiction or where to stick a company.
Well, thank you. This is pretty interesting because we have people from, I guess, that are into or supporting 3 different jurisdictions. So I anticipate that we're going to have jurisdictional competition, as in fact we already do, right? So it's interesting the pros of each of the jurisdictions that you've each chosen to operate in. And then, of course, what I'm seeing also being part of this EU blockchain forum is pretty much, you know, many countries in the world want to establish the foothold for growing these entities. And then you have, on the other end of caution, you have like the United States. I spent a year in DC. I got to learn a little bit about what was going on there, and of course it's changing all the time. Even the United States is trying to figure it out from a jurisdictional perspective. And before I ask another question, I'll just say, I'm not sure if everyone knows, but recently the SEC became a lot more open to companies coming in. I think they even set up like a center or something. There was a CoinDesk article about it, where you could go in and talk to the SEC. Certainly I have friends that are lawyers, and they take their clients in and they say, we want to do this with a token, and the SEC will go, okay, thank you for telling us. So the SEC is constantly seeking information, and everybody is waiting, of course, in the States to know what's going to happen with security tokens, but also a lot of entities in the States have moved abroad. So I wanted to go back to Olga now. So Olga, what's a bit of your comeback on Switzerland versus Malta? There's definitely pluses to both of them, but I noticed a little Switzerland jab in there, so I'm going to give you the gloves back now.
Yeah, like what are the pro and contras? Maybe if you would decide.
Sure.
Where
Yeah,
to
some
go?
of the contrasts, or you're still bullish on Switzerland.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's not just Switzerland. You know, we have Switzerland and Liechtenstein. And Liechtenstein is a small country, neighboring country, just like 1 hour drive from where we are in Crypto Valley. And Liechtenstein is kind of like comparable to Malta. They introduced the new Blockchain Act, which, you know, completely changes not just like, you know, how to deal with exchanges and with cryptocurrency, but also moving one step further and talking about tokenization of real assets. So, you know, in our current law, right, we don't know a token digital footprint of an asset. It doesn't exist, right? So we need to work with existing law and kind of like figure out how we attach to existing law the token. They went the other way around. They said, well, token first, right? And token, to the token you can attach physical assets, right? And they created even the whole framework around like, you know, physical validator, like the entities that, you know, is in charge of checking if the token is really backed by that asset, right? So just an example for you, like really, really sophisticated legal framework around cryptocurrencies, exchanges, but also tokenized assets, right? And so, you know, for us, it's kind of like, we're in Switzerland, so if it's in Switzerland or in Liechtenstein, you get in the car, you drive 1 hour, and you're there. So we Smart Valor, we're set up in both countries. We have regulatory permission in Switzerland to act as a financial intermediary, and we're running for the bank license. Oh, we got also the receival from Liechtenstein to run an exchange, and now we're also applying for the banking license in Liechtenstein. So it's kind of like a combination of both totally makes sense. And, you know, they all also move by different speed, right? So Liechtenstein is a bit fast forward, Switzerland is more slow, but more definite. Like if in Switzerland they decide something, that's going to be for the next 30 years, right? In Malta, I'm not quite sure that's the way, right? Apart from the reputation, I mean, reputation is not great. You know, Malta is known for selling EU passports and gambling and gaming. Like, if you're in serious business, like, I'm not quite sure this is a place you want to be, like, to have your headquarters, right? If there is no other choice, yeah, that might be the case, right? And of course, a lot of people also say, well, Switzerland is so expensive. It's true. It's one of the most expensive countries, right? You hire office assistant and she's like at 80K, right? So that's something that is really difficult to work with. But again, you know, I think long term, if you're building financial services business long term, that's a place to be next to London and New York.
Thank you, Olga. Rex, I'm going to ask you too. So Rex, with China cracking down so much and kind of all things are changing there quite a bit, at least since I've been in this space, and Korea is also very active in Asia. What are some of the strengths of Singapore related to what some of the other panelists said as far as being jurisdictional friendly, in addition to having the fintech roots?
By the way, actually Singapore actually speaks good English.
I was going to say, I lived there.
Yeah, and all the contracts are actually in English because it's a former British colony. So, and there's a lot of multinational companies. I think most of the multinational companies that are going to Asia tend to base in Singapore. So there's a lot of good, like Google has a big office, Facebook has a big office there, and as well as a lot of the big corporates. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think makes Singapore interesting is that the government has kind of defined, though it could be more clearly defined, they've defined things like utility and up until recently it was decently easy to open a bank account, but it's getting harder, and I think that's just because there's so many scams out there. But I think that's in general all the banking jurisdictions, right?
Okay, we're going to get some questions, but before we go to that, Stephen, you're itching to say something, but before you say, just as part of your answer, please, there might be people in the room that are interested in setting up in these jurisdictions. So after your comment, I'd like each of the panelists to say, you know, what are some of the advice that you could give to some of these people in the room on what to, you've obviously covered good things about each country, but how to get started, or what are the most important things to look for, or what were the most challenging things?
Yeah, so again, I tend to look at things in 360 in totality. So when we looked, again, at Malta, and let me be clear, I'm not this big cheerleader going, oh, Malta's great. We diligently looked at it, but there were a couple other things that we didn't get. Zurich. Liechtenstein was a little bit better, but Malta, at least at my level, I've been fortunate. We've got direct access to the ministers. We have direct access to the people who are running and controlling that country, which is important. But more importantly than that, we have direct access to the layer of the attorneys underneath who've written the laws. So when you talk about being nimble, we're able to sit down with the attorneys who crafted the law and say, hey, have you thought about this? And they go, oh, that's a great idea. Give us 3 months. We'll build it back in. So Malta was very nimble, very accessible, but there were two other components we looked at. They're thinking ahead in terms of we've got them structured to do partners and pilots. So if you've got a company that's rolling out and it's in identity or healthcare or visual, and Malta's willing to be a pilot customer for you, that opens up the entire EU as a global market. And I don't know about you guys, I've raised a ton of money. It's a pain in the butt. 3 simple words is all you need to know for raising money. Capital follows customers. First question you always get asked is, who's your customer? If you can answer that question with a government agency, you've got an entire half of the globe around the European side to sell into. So that was a lot different. Back to your point, when it came to jurisdiction for us, we were fortunate to get direct access. So we have the attorneys that wrote the law. Any of my friends that want to go to Malta, I send them right to, I tell them, here's the strengths of Ian, and here are the 3 guys that wrote the law. Here's their differences. Pick the best one. And we introduce them, and we have the people taking care of them that way. And it's been a lot easier. So access was really important, and we weren't able to gain that in Singapore and Zurich and Liechtenstein at the level we were in Malta.
Thank you, Stephen. Olga, your thoughts on parties or companies that are interested in in going abroad for jurisdictions, what to look out for, what to look for?
So what I learned, guys, don't overpay lawyers. You know, I hate lawyers. I think it's such an economic slack, right? Like, I would, right, give me back, thank you. So the way to go about it, before you pay for anything from lawyers, ask for 3 references, right? From 3 different legal companies. And also in most countries, there is something called, well, startup support organizations or kind of like, you know, national agencies that welcome foreign companies. So this is all for free, all this advice, almost in any country, also in Switzerland, in Singapore, in Japan, they are everywhere, right? So they can help you to set up a company almost for free. So by the way, to set up a company in Switzerland is 1,200 Swiss franc, right? And send them all to hell who tells you this is 10,000, right? So the cost is really just that. It's just notary signature of creating a company, right? And yeah, and then further down, right? So you need, well, if you do ICO, you need prospectus or ICO terms, right? Always ask 3-4 companies, this is a job, how much I need to pay you, right? And you will certainly find that you can help pay the half of it, right? So that's probably the advice.
Thank you. And Rex, you're from Singapore and you set up in Singapore, is that right?
Actually, I'm from LA, but
Oh.
but my co-founder is Singaporean.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, because I thought you said earlier, yeah.
Co-founder, yeah.
Gaia,
yeah.
okay. So what kind of lessons learned do you have or experience you could share before we get to questions?
Yeah, so I mean, Singapore, one of the things that was actually pretty good was that they actually have quite a few lawyers that are well versed in blockchain, because so many projects. I think the number was over 1,000 projects have set up in Singapore. And so that was really one of the keys, was that it wasn't very hard, and we actually didn't spend that much money because there was already some precedent. Of course, probably some of the earlier pioneers probably paid their dues, but that was one of the things. And the second thing is that we specifically do business in about 15 countries. And so for us, tax is actually quite important. So the Singapore law is that money that you make in Singapore is taxable, but anything outside is not. And then they have tax treaties with a bunch of countries. And so that's really one of the things that we looked at. And our business is specifically Asia, so that's not to take away from Zug or Malta. In fact, I think Malta is becoming a pretty good hub for fiat crypto exchanges, because they have an easier time for bank accounts and stuff like that, and how to trade fiat in the crypto. So I think each jurisdiction has pros and cons, and all 3 I think are good jurisdictions overall, compared to where we are right here. But then yeah, so but yeah.
Thank you. It's funny, all the talk about lawyers, the lawyers in this, because when I first got into this space, a lot of the lawyers were saying like, oh my gosh, these smart contracts, they're going to put us out of a job. But obviously that is not the case in setting up these companies. We have time for a couple quick questions. Does anyone have a question? Oh, we've got those 2 there, and then we're good.
We have time for one question.
Alex, fight him for the microphone.
We can probably get 2 quick ones in.
All right, a quick question. Actually, I think it's for Susan. I mean, the thing is that, the good things for Switzerland, good things for Malta, we've been around these things as well. But do you think that the real game changer is when France is going to publish their PAC ruling in January? We have a really full-fledged country in the EU that's actually going to embrace crypto totally. Is it going to be a game changer, you think?
I couldn't quite catch the question.
So the French regulator is going to publish their stance on crypto and on ICOs and all these things
right.
in January, right? I mean, right now they don't say no, they say keep going, keep going. We'll codify it all. We put it in law in January. Do you think that will be a game changer? Seeing the issues you see right now in Europe, where you have Malta, for instance, where you have 2 banks that you can use. One's being shut down yesterday. There's still lots of issues in Gibraltar, in Malta, in Estonia, those kind of places. Is it going to be a game changer when a real big EU country actually takes the forefront and said, okay, let's just do this?
Yeah, definitely, you know, larger countries always have kind of an advantage in the financial world. What I personally liked about what's happening now is you do have, you know, countries like Malta, Bermuda that seem to have a bit of more of a fair play. They are a bit more nimble than some of these larger countries. But it's always in the details, right? It really depends on what France comes out with. I haven't read personally what they're coming out with, but yeah, if a major, huge company with a large economic base and a lot of infrastructure steps up and has an equal playing ground to some of these other jurisdictions, then it's going to be a game changer. I will say though, you know, the larger countries might have a bit more challenges with being nimble and other agreements they may have with other countries, but definitely large countries they're seeing the future and they're seeing smaller countries rushing ahead, and what I'm hearing from them is like, wait a second, we need to get in this game. And another quick question.
Sure, this will be fast as well. Just wanted to talk about sort of the banking underpinning of this, and I run a crypto fund out of Canada right now, and one of our biggest challenges was, even though I used to work for this bank, was getting a bank account, and we ended up after months and months and months convincing them that we're not money launderers. But the evolution of those big, slow institutions versus the new crypto banks that are starting, like what Malcolm's working with Gravitas, and there's a bunch of other ones that are starting new banks that are entirely focused on crypto. I'm just interested in your thoughts on whether it's going to be an evolution of existing institutions or kind of a revolution of new crypto-focused banks.
I'm going to throw this to Olga first and then to Stephen, because Olga, you have quite a strong banking background.
UBS, UBS, Barclays Capital, and all of these institutions on the back. You know, this is what we see in Switzerland this year. Like almost all banks stopped to work with cryptocurrency or blockchain companies, right? We were cut off Credit Suisse, UBS. Like we lived five months without a bank account, right? And probably most of you know how unpleasant is that state, right? So what I see today, you know, that some smaller banks, like especially with us in Liechtenstein, but also smaller private banks in Switzerland, they started to open the doors and started to work with cryptocurrency companies very cautiously. And on the other side, yes, we're going to be a bank too in several months, right? So you will see kind of like, I think you will see first smaller banks opening and in parallel new challenger banks coming up. And then after, let's say, 3-4 years, then the bigger banks will also jump on the train. And why? Because maybe you guys heard that was a big announcement several days ago. FATCA, you know, the International Anti-Money Laundering Organization, put out the guidance, the rules now that in every country you need to regulate cryptocurrency business, right? So this is a big milestone, right? It's not anymore like, you know, I'm this small country and I don't want to do this. They will shut you out, the same as Iran and Iraq and so on, right? So now this is getting serious, and as we move forward, for banks, it will be more easier to just jump on the train and, you know, join the revolution.
Thank you. Stephen, last comments?
Yeah, again, I tend to be not politically correct, but politically direct. I think our industry's already screwed themselves, because there's not enough distinctions in terminology. And what I mean by that is you can go into a bank and say, oh, I'm a blockchain company. They immediately think you're doing cryptocurrency. If you could be doing blockchain as contracts. That's like a software development company, has nothing to do with crypto. So when you go in, we ran into this again in Malta. One of the companies was named Blockchain Technology. It wasn't a crypto, it wasn't an ICO. It was just performing contracts for legal people. But the banks don't know how to do that. So that was one side. The real problem for banks, for people like ourselves and other people, is when you've raised money in an ICO and you have the cryptocurrency, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, or whatever, the banks, when we were having the discussions with them, they're a profit center. The way they make money is they take your deposit and they loan that money out and make money on the loans. You can't loan crypto out. So it took a while for them. This is what we talked to them in Malta, is they're going to charge a custodial fee. So we're actually going to pay a fee for the privilege of putting crypto in the bank. But the benefit of that, now they make money. They're going to provide the cold storage, all of the security. I'll be able to do instant conversions to fiat, but we've got them set up, we think, doing letters of credit and lines of credit. And again, they had to think differently. Traditional collateralization is, I'll put my house up, give me a line of credit, and I can write checks against it. Well, with crypto, you can do the same thing. You can move $1 million into a targeted account, have a 30% loan to value, and now I can write checks to make payroll. It's securitized by my own funds in my own account. So a lot of it, I think, for the banks is they had to think more nimbly and outside the box, and they're just now finally catching up to ways to make money on a custodial factor.
Thank you.
Great last comments. Let's
Th-
give our
thank-
speakers a big round of applause, and we'll.
Yay.
This is definitely a topic that we all are very interested in and could talk about all day. Our speakers are going to be around, so find them, ask them your questions. Thank you for starting us off on a really great foot.
Thank you.